Chapter 3 The Duchess Makes a Deal. Gospel of the Pantheon. Verse 1. 2 days after the ascension of the Beholder into the Eye in 1718, Anthropotropicles visited New Hamptonshire, where Campago Religeti still lived and worked. The god of stumbles and confusion was not there to see Religeti, however. He was there to see the Duke's 16-year-old daughter, the Duchess. Now, Anthropotropicles is famously fond of young, lovely mortals, and certainly the Duchess was lovely, young, and mortal. But on this day the god came to the Duchess because he needed the old woman that only she could become, a woman whose imperiousness, hardened over the course of decades, might rival that of Alienator himself. The god began his midday visit with an uncharacteristic courtesy. Instead of simply appearing before the Duchess in her chamber, Anthropotropicles appeared out in the stone hallway, that he might knock and announce himself. A guard, an errand boy with a sword, really, stood stationed outside the noblewoman's chamber, but this man seemed to neither see the god nor hear the sound of the god's fist knocking upon the door. Knock, knock. "Who is it, and what do you want?" came the muffled sound of a woman's voice through the door. "Duchess, I am the god Anthropotropicles, and I wish to speak with you." "Enter then," she said, after a short silence, "and let me see you." The god opened the door and stepped into the room. The Duchess saw a very handsome fellow enter her chamber. He wasn't particularly tall, but his eyes and hair were jet black, and he carried himself with an undeniable grace. There was definitely something to this fellow. "Perhaps you truly are," said the Duchess, after she had looked him up and down a few times. "I am indeed, good lady," said Anthropotropicles, flourishing a small bow. Then something occurred to the Duchess. "What did you do to my guard?" she asked. "He ought to have announced you." "No need for concern," replied the deity. "He's fine. He simply didn't notice me, is all. It's really not his fault." Now, despite her young age, the Duchess was anything but naive, and so, although her instincts said this visitor might well be he whom he claimed to be, she nevertheless tried to maintain some skepticism. It didn't last long. The stranger radiated some force, likability perhaps, and the very tangible quality of that energy was enough, after a few moments, to settle for her the matter of his authenticity. "Your charisma magic won't work on me, god of stumbles and confusion," said the Duchess. "I hope you are right about that, Duchess, because that is precisely what has brought me here," answered the god. The Duchess arched an eyebrow. "You don't say. Well, get on with it then. What do you want?" "Must we rush into business so quickly, my dear? I think that first perhaps some wine is in order, don't you?" And before the woman could reply, the god produced a bottle and 2 glasses. He pointed to the top of the bottle, and the cork popped out and fell onto the floor. "May I have a seat?" asked the god, looking around the room for a chair. The Duchess's bedchamber also served as a primary office. It was one large room with a balcony. There was a sizable bed against the south wall, and a desk set slightly away from the north. The Duchess currently sat behind this desk, with her back to the wall, for she had been working when the god arrived, and the chair in which she sat was the room's one and only chair. This was not due to any oversight, mind you. The Duchess preferred to force visitors to stand. Unfortunately, the Duchess dealt on this occasion with a god, and she concluded it was probably unwise to make him stand. For a moment, though, she had seriously considered doing just that. "Very well," said the Duchess. "Let us move out onto the balcony. It's a pleasant enough day, and there are seats there for the both of us, and a small table for the wine." So the god followed the Duchess outside, and the two situated themselves beneath the shade of the awning. Anthropotropicles poured the wine, and the Duchess drank. She had never tasted better, but reflectively she gave no indication that she was impressed. Lovely view, remarked Anthropotropicles. "Yes, it is," replied the Duchess curtly, and determined to establish the upper hand in whatever exchange was to come, she elected to go on the offensive straight away. "They say that wherever you go, High Lord, chaos follows. Given that my family has worked hard to establish and maintain order in this dukedom, I am loath to see it undermined. So I must say I am not particularly happy about this visit." "Relax, my dear. I did not come here to undermine your authority. I came here to help you solidify it." "And why would you, the god of stumbles and confusion, wish to do that?" asked the Duchess. "Well, it's funny you should mention that unfortunate moniker. Curtis settled it with me. He settled me with that name, you know. I certainly would never have chosen it for myself, as it is most misleading, and I am consequently very much misunderstood." The truth is that I wish no ill whatsoever upon mortal kind. In fact, I wish to help mortals, but it is hard for me to do so because people fear me, and after all, I would never wish to force my help upon anybody. Your consideration of our wishes is most gracious, High Lord, said the Duchess. If the god heard the sarcasm, he gave no indication of it. Yes, well, in the sense that grace is the opposite of clumsiness, I guess it is indeed gracious, given that force is the clumsiest possible way to achieve one's ends, I mean, but you already understand that, Duchess, no? What I understand need not concern you, God, said the woman, but I will say that a ruler, if she is to command the respect of her people, must be willing to use force when necessary. Ah, perhaps so. I shall defer to your judgment regarding the politics of mortals, Duchess. You do have first-hand experience in such matters. Interruptus drank his wine, and the Duchess drank hers. She did not take her eyes off the god while she drank, however. She did not trust him at all. Regardless, the god continued, my point is that I'd like to have an opportunity to work with mortal kind, to teach people to better understand and manifest divinity. That's why I came to see you. I'd like you to help me do it. I think you have the wrong mortal, said the Duchess. I can hardly imagine anything that appeals to me less. The god laughed. You don't mince words, Duchess, I'll give you that, but please hear me out. The Duchess drummed her fingers upon the table and appeared to consider the request. She knew that she couldn't very well refuse the immortal, but she was not about to encourage any presumption on his part. Very well, she said. She at last sighed. Speak your mind, God, that we may be done with this. Thank you, my lady, said Interruptus. Well, to put it simply, I want you to build my church. I am desirous of a church and a clergy. I come to you because I hope to convince you to construct for me the great cathedral of my church here in New Hamptonshire. The Duchess was not at all religious, but she knew that the Curtisarians had a great cathedral, and the baby lady Baines, she believed, had erected one to their god as well. The god of time had one too, now that she thought about it, and she knew the cathedrals to be massive structures and significant wells of power. The notion that she would want to build one here in New Hamptonshire was ridiculous. The woman set down her glass. This god, she decided, needed a good lambasting, and given that to lambast was among her favorite activities, she launched into it with gusto. Foremost, High Lord, such a construction project would not be cheap, began the Duchess. How do you propose we are to pay for such a thing? Second, this church of yours in my dukedom will only weaken the duchy. If the church is to be powerful, then it must have authority over certain things. And if it is to have authority, then such authority, it claims, will have to be authority that the Duke or the Duchess relinquish. Is. True enough, I suppose, said the god. Third, continued the Duchess, why would you speak to me about this? My father is the Duke, not I, and while he affords me a great deal of latitude regarding the Duchy's business, this is too substantial a matter for me to undertake without his consent, even if I wanted to, which I don't. The fact that you have failed to consider these facts tells me that you are embarrassingly unprepared even to meet with me, to discuss why it is such a bad idea. The Duchess let that last bit sink in for a moment. Then she resumed her litany. Besides, she said, the Church of the God of Time, despite our efforts to discourage it, has a hold on the hearts of many of our peasants. My people are stubborn when it comes to matters of faith, and they are unlikely to switch their allegiance to any other god, you least of all. And lastly, even if I were to persuade the people to direct their worship towards you, I haven't the slightest interest in doing so. As a finishing touch, the Duchess concluded with her well-practiced and usually very effective cold, hard stare. This tactic, like her only one chair strategy, helped keep people deferential. It said, no uppityness will be tolerated. Interruptus smiled faintly and met her eyes with his own. Such impudence irritated the Duchess, and she glared even more fiercely at the deity. But on this day, for the first time, the woman discovered the limits of her talents. The Duchess was extremely good at intimidating people, but Interruptus wasn't people, and he wasn't intimidated. The god just stared right back at her, without the slightest sign of discomfort, and eventually the woman could bear the weight of the god's eyes upon her no longer, and she looked away. When she did, Interruptus responded. All reasonable points, Duchess, all very reasonable, except the one about your people's piety, of course. The god of time is dead, you see, and his demise has left something of a spiritual vacuum in the world. His flock have already begun to dissipate, and his churches have begun to crumble, for the people no longer feel the resonance of his divinity within their walls. He's dead? Asked the Duchess. I don't expect, though, the immortal continued. ignoring the woman's question, that these people will simply lose all interest in divinity. In fact, I'm quite confident they will seek that resonance elsewhere. But how can it be that... Interrupted Heracles held up a hand to silence the young woman. As for the cost, my dear, this cathedral will eventually pay for itself. When my church is growing large, its cathedral will attract many travelers and wealth, and much business will grow up around it. Your duchy will stand above all its neighbors in status, for it will boast the grand cathedral of a high lord of the Pantheon. But, attempted the Duchess once more, but Heracles silenced her yet again and continued. Do not think, however, that I hope to convince you to assist me on the merits of the idea alone, good lady. For you see, while the death of the god of time has afforded me the chance to fill the spiritual void of your people, that is not the only thing that it has afforded me. I am also able now to offer you something very significant in exchange for your cooperation. Something that I imagine would be of immeasurable value to a mortal such as yourself. This got the Duchess's attention, so this time she made no effort to interject. Perhaps she realized she needed to shift gears. It appeared this might be a negotiation worth taking seriously, after all. None of this was lost on the immortal, and he took a slow sip of wine and clicked his tongue as if casually appreciating the palate of the wine. Then he unhurriedly considered his words before he finally proceeded. How much do you know about the god of time, Duchess? He asked. I mean, do you understand what he did, what his purpose was, so to speak? I can't say I've thought about it much, answered the woman truthfully. But she was not happy about how the conversation had turned. She decided that some snottiness was in order. Oh, wait, she exclaimed. It has something to do with time, right? Heracles chuckled. This poised and imperious woman was actually only an adolescent, and he was glad to see that she occasionally acted like one. Indeed, that's very insightful, Duchess. He kept time orderly, is the long and short of it. It was because of him that all the places of the world aged at the same speed. He prevented one place from zooming off into the future while another languished in the past. He kept things nice and even all over the world. And now he's dead, right? Said the Duchess, intrigued enough by what the god said to put aside her reflex to dismiss, at least for now. So then... Yes, answered Heracles, the equilibrium is no longer being maintained. Some places in the world will now age much faster than before, while others will age much slower. Okay, said the Duchess. Okay, said the Duchess. I will admit that you have piqued my curiosity, God. Continue. Well, obliged the immortal, this phenomenon will not affect the living. The people and the plants and creatures will live and die just as before, and because lifespans will be unchanged, mortals will have a hard time noticing that anything is different. The god paused and drank. It's a little more complicated, really, but Heracles shrugged and left it at that. But what? Asked the Duchess. Well, suffice it to say that mortals are self-involved creatures, and they choose their metrics accordingly. Toss the last emoticon into the mix, and... Who? Interjected the woman. Oh, sorry, alienator. The last emoticon is another name for alienator. Okay, go on. But Heracles was apparently not quite ready to leave this point. Surely you know the history of the arrival of the emoticons and of the awakening of the world. It's a very significant event, you know. The Duchess suppressed a sigh. No, I don't, but fine. The last emoticon is alienator. Thanks for clarifying. Now, let's not get sidetracked. Okay, said the god. Let's see, where was I? You were saying something about how time has changed, but it won't actually affect anybody? No, the death of god of time will affect everybody, objected Heracles. But the Duchess was not finished. And before that you mentioned some sort of incentive that you have thus far failed to elucidate upon? I'm working my way towards it, said the god. These things are all interrelated, you know. So be it, said the Duchess. But do try to keep the theology to a minimum. It's painfully dull. I'll try, Duchess, said the god. The Duchess nodded, and the god resumed his explanation. Uneven time does not operate directly upon the living, that is true, but it impacts the land itself, the dirt and the rocks, and the sticks, the non-living and the dead, and more significantly, it therefore impacts culture. Culture is the consequence of the interplay between agents and space. It emerged from the proximity of life to other life. It is tied to the land as well as to the living, so these time issues will be, already are. shaping the cultural arc of each of the various places of the world, which certainly will impact the people who make up those cultures. The woman squinted, as if trying to make the god's word come into better focus. "Let me be a bit more specific, Duchess," said the god. "What does uneven time mean for you? It means that in some places the people will develop new ideas and new technologies very quickly, while in other places the way of life will remain unchanged for decades or even centuries. Uneven time will resist the influence of traders and travelers. When people bring ideas from a fast land into a slow land, the ideas simply won't catch on or will be dismissed, and mortals won't even notice that it's happening." This the Duchess understood. It seemed quite odd, but it made sense, and something occurred to her.
"But now you've told me of the time effect, so I'll be able to notice it, yes? Seems impossible to me that I wouldn't."
"I don't really know for sure what the answer to that question is," admitted Interrupter, please, "but I'd guess that probably yes, you will be able to." The Duchess nodded. "At any rate," shrugged the god, "there is one place in the world that is quickest and another that is slowest, because although time is uneven from place to place, it's still static within a given place, see?"
"Yes, okay,"
said the Duchess after a second or two.
"That makes sense."
"No, the fastest place in the world is the area where the god of time died. He died in 1700. When he fell from a plateau, and the whole rock formation is already eroding away, and the exact spot where he landed is the single fastest few feet of ground on the planet. That spot of ground is so fast, in fact, that when I went to see the body of the god of time, not 4 hours after he died, all of his bones had turned to dust." The god reached into his pocket. "Except," he said, "this one." He held up a sun-bleached vertebrae for the woman to see, then placed the bone on the table between them.
"I take it that bone has some significance?"
asked the woman. "Yes, but we will get to that. I have one more thing to tell you about uneven time. You understood about the fastest land, right?"
"Yes, of course."
"All right, then," said the god. "Well, on the other end of the spectrum, naturally, is the slowest land. And that land, my dear, just so happens to be right here, the dukedom of New Hamptonshire." The Duchess considered this news.
"I'm not sure that's a distinction I particularly want my duchy to have."
"Your lack of enthusiasm is understandable," replied the god, "but living in the slowest place does potentially give you one big advantage, because the only reason I told you all that stuff about the uneven time was so you could understand what the bone does and why. It is the incentive I earlier mentioned. With this bone, you see, I can tie one mortal to the pace of the land in which she resides." It took a few moments, but the Duchess eventually deduced the implications of what the god had said. When she did, she opened her mouth as if to speak, but she made no sound. "Just to be sure that we understand one another," said the god, "let me spell it out for you. If I were to use this bone to tie, say, the Duchess of New Hamptonshire to the land, she would age very slowly indeed, provided she stays in New Hamptonshire, of course, because this land is the slowest place in the world."
"What exactly do you mean by very slowly?"
asked the Duchess, her voice betraying just a hint of the excitement she felt. "Well, perhaps this hypothetical Duchess would age but 1 year for every 100 years she lives. Perhaps even slower than that. I assure you, Duchess, this place feels very slow. But it will be at least a few more decades before I can be much more specific than that. Uneven time is, after all, new to me, too." The Duchess forced herself to breathe slowly. She would give anything, do anything, to get what the god offered. Build him a church court, without a second thought. It was a fantastic deal. But the Duchess steadied her will and tried to think of this as she would any other negotiation, and that meant doing whatever she could to hide her enthusiasm from the immortal.
"That's awfully vague, don't you think?"
asked the Duchess after she counted off 5 slow breaths.
"If I were this hypothetical duchess you were talking about, I'd be very concerned that what is being suggested might bear little resemblance to the actual thing. Because what's being asked for is very specific, right? Build a grand cathedral for a High Lord of the Pantheon. There's only one design for such a structure. Unless Actron's delivered unto his people a second blueprint, no?
No, you are right. There is only one design for a grand cathedral.
And it is therefore easy to say precisely what is required to build one,"
concluded the Duchess.
"The expense of such an endeavor would be enormous. It would require gold and resources, labor, each in massive quantities. Yes?"
Absolutely, said the god. I cannot disagree with that.
So, continued the mortal, were this hypothetical Duchess to take on such a task, she would know quite clearly what was expected of her, yet she has not afforded a clear picture of what she would get in return. She has offered vague descriptions, like very slowly.
I do understand your point, Duchess. Assured interrupted, please, but what you...
One more thing, deity,
interjected the woman.
If I were this hypothetical Duchess, I'd expect you to present the real Duchess a real offer, because only when that happens can negotiations begin in earnest.
And then the woman leaned back in her chair and set her mouth into a studied frown and folded her arms upon her chest. Excuse me. Interrupter Hippocles smiled to see such fierceness. Everything that he had seen so far had confirmed his belief that she was the ideal mortal for his plan, and for that he felt towards her genuine warmth. You are right, Duchess. Acknowledge the god, you have not yet heard any offer. The reason that you haven't is I have not yet established with complete certainty that you are capable of doing what I need you to do.
You're concerned that I will be unable to build your cathedral?
Asked the woman. No, I am sure you can build it, but there are risks that come along with, let's say, associating with me. This endeavor will require an occasion of close association, and I need to establish that you have the fortitude to handle the risks.
What risks?
Demanded the Duchess.
And what do you mean by association? Am I at risk now, sitting here with you?
Interrupter Hippocles ignored the question. Duchess, do you recall what you said to me when I first arrived today? The Duchess thought back.
I believe I said, who are you and what do you want?
Well, yes, laughed the god. That's what you said first. But I am referring to your statement regarding what you called my charisma magic. You told me it would not work on you.
Oh, right. And you told me that was the reason you came. I thought you were just being glib.
No, I meant precisely what I said, and I believe that for your self-assessment was correct. Or correct enough for my purposes, at any rate. But before I can make the offer, I need you to prove it. You should know, however, that if you fail the test, you will no longer wish to live. This gave the Duchess pause. She eyed the immortal warily.
Well, what sort of test is this, God?
The charisma you felt. Duchess is but the slightest trickle of the divinity I contain. No mortal can be exposed to it all and keep her autonomy, for I am the god of the follies of the people, and among mortal kind's most ill-advised follies is faith in leadership. It is a mortal's desire to place his or her will in the hands of another mortal. It manifests as an embrace of charisma in which the person gives away his autonomy and offers adoration to another. Doing so provides a sort of pleasure, the pleasure that a favored pet feels when given praise, for example.
That's folly indeed, God, replied the young woman. I have nothing but contempt for such weak-mindedness. It's hardly even useful in an underling.
The god shook his head. All mortals, even you, Duchess, have within them some longing to indulge in this folly. That urge is fundamental to mortality, because every mortal begins life wholly dependent. Every mortal at some point desires to return to that state.
The noble woman folded her arms and snorted. I have no such desire within me, God.
The test, should you choose to take it, will prove you wrong about that. The test will expose you to as much as 1/4 of what I have within me, and you will succumb to that divinity. The test is not whether you can resist. You cannot. The test is, can you recover your independent will once I have taken the divinity away again?
Think what you wish, God, said the noble woman, but I don't do adoring. I will pass your test.
And if you do, I will offer you the deal we have discussed, the bone for my cathedral.
Offer it to me now, contingent upon passing the test,
countered the Duchess. All right, your distrust is probably wise, although I assure you unnecessary in this case. I want you to pass because I want to make this deal. I need you to stay young for a long time. Before the Duchess could ask him what he meant by that last part, the god picked up the bone from the table and held it aloft between himself and the woman. Duchess, he said, I make you the following offer. Build me my church, and I will tie you to the land. I will give you the potential to live at least 1,000 years, contingent, of course, upon you passing the test. Internally, the woman rubbed her hands together greedily. Externally, however, she appeared perhaps even more dubious than before.
Potential? She asked. What do you mean the potential to live 1,000 years?
The god had assumed that the woman would immediately accept the offer, but it appeared that once again he had underestimated the toughness of this particular mortal. So he sighed and set the bone back on the table. "Well, if you get stabbed in the head the day after you complete the cathedral, then you will no doubt regret having made the deal. I cannot guarantee you long life, because to live is an inherently risky activity. I can, however, promise you that if you do die in 10 or 20 or even 50 years, you will look like a dead teenager." The Duchess nodded and tried to think of any catches that she might be missing.
"What guarantees are there that once I'm finished you will not just kill me and steal the bone back?"
The god considered this. "I don't think there's anything I might say or do that will assuage all your doubts regarding this, Duchess, but I'll tell you the truth anyway." The woman nodded for the god to continue. "I have never before approached any mortal with any sort of offer like this, and based on what I have seen here today, I think it's very unlikely I will ever approach another, even should you decline or fail the test. You are so precisely the right person for what I need done that you are almost certainly the only person who can accomplish this. This bone is meant for you and you alone. Regardless of the outcome today, I will never have any need of it again." The Duchess thought about this statement for some time before responding.
There are many rulers who might build you a church, god. You clearly have things in mind beyond what you have told me."
"Perhaps I do, woman, but the offer I present obligates you only to build my church and nothing else."
"Nevertheless," countered the Duchess, "what you have planned clearly involves me in some capacity. So you can tell me at least something more regarding it."
"No."
"You can't or you won't?"
"I'm not going to." The Duchess drummed her fingers on the table and chewed her bottom lip. What an irritating answer.
"If I'm the only mortal who can do this, then you will have to compensate me accordingly,"
the Duchess told the god.
"In addition to the bone, what are you prepared to offer me? I'm the only candidate, and therefore I'm critical to your plans." "Surely you cannot expect me to accept your first offer given the leverage of my position."
"Duchess, I applaud your efforts and your negotiating skills, but I need offer nothing else. I am not some rival duke you can befuddle, you know. I've come to you with an offer, and when I go, I will leave having obtained your commitment and having tied you to the land, or I will leave with the bone. Those are the only two possible outcomes." The Duchess nodded and rubbed her nose. It had been worth a shot, but she had pretty well run out of ideas. To conclude, negotiations, having won not a single meaningful concession from her opponent, galled her immensely, though. So she kept thinking, and eventually one last possible approach occurred to her.
"There's still the matter of my father, god," said the woman. "You have not addressed that. You're asking me to commit the resources of this dukedom to your project, but that is not presently my decision to make. What will happen if I accept your offer only to find that despite a good faith effort on my part, I am unable to persuade my father to honor the agreement I have made?"
"I am immortal and therefore patient. You will be obligated to fulfill your end of the bargain when your father dies or abdicates the throne, and not before." This was quite a concession indeed, thought the Duchess, for her father was still a young man.
High Lord and Triple, you have a deal. I will build you your church in accordance with the terms we have agreed upon."
The god clapped his hands together, feeling rather satisfied himself. "Excellent," he said. "Then it is time to test." End of verse 1. It's a long one.